Who else on the black that are black actors or black in the business that's an A-list to this big?
They invited me, the individuals that have the video invited me to California, to LA, to come and view the tape.
Imagine a revelation so unsettling that it forces Hollywood to look in the mirror and question everything it thought it understood about power, loyalty, and silence. Not because of a rumor whispered online.
Facts that I walked in on.
Who'd you walk in on?
Him and Dwayne Martin. All right, I opened the door to Dwayne's dressing room, and that's when I see Dwayne and having sex with Will.
Let me process that for a second.
But because a name like 50 Cent steps forward and confirms that something far bigger than internet gossip is unfolding behind the scenes. This isn't just about Diddy anymore, and it's not just about an alleged tape. It's about how one unexpected reaction from Will Smith suddenly shifted the entire conversation, turning speculation into a moment that Hollywood insiders can no longer ignore. What makes this moment so different from every other headline is not the allegation itself, but who acknowledged it, who distanced themselves from it, and who responded when the pressure became impossible to contain. For weeks, the entertainment world had been buzzing with quiet conversations about alleged footage tied to Diddy footage that, according to multiple legal voices, was being discussed behind closed doors long before the public ever caught wind of it. At first, these discussions stayed vague. No names, no confirmations. Just the same familiar pattern Hollywood has relied on for decades: silence, ambiguity, and time. That silence cracked the moment 50 Cent entered the picture. Known for never choosing his words casually, 50 Cent's comments didn't directly show anything, didn't release anything, and didn't even describe anything in detail. Yet somehow what he implied was enough to ignite a wave of speculation stronger than any anonymous leak. His reaction alone signaled that whatever was being discussed had crossed a line not just legally, but culturally. In an industry where people often stay quiet to protect future opportunities, even acknowledging the existence of something controversial sends a message. And that message didn't stop with Diddy. Almost immediately, attention shifted toward a question insiders had reportedly been asking long before the public ever did. If there truly was material connected to one of Diddy's private events, and if that material involved someone more influential than Diddy himself, who would have the most to lose? That's when Will Smith's name began circulating, not as an accusation, but as a point of tension. For years, Will Smith has represented stability in Hollywood, a carefully maintained image built on consistency, family appeal, and global respect. Even moments of controversy in his career were followed by long periods of silence and recovery, which is why his reaction to being loosely connected to this growing storm stood out so sharply. Unlike others who chose to ignore the noise entirely, Will Smith addressed the rumors directly, dismissing them publicly, and drawing a clear boundary between himself and Diddy. On the surface, it looked like a simple denial. But in Hollywood, timing is everything. Legal analysts quickly pointed out that responses matter just as much as accusations. When someone of Will Smith's stature chooses to speak, especially when no formal allegation has been made, it often signals concern about how quickly narratives can spiral out of control. His words weren't defensive, they weren't aggressive, but they were deliberate. And that alone added another layer of intrigue to a story already filled with unanswered questions. Behind the scenes, attorneys familiar with high-profile cases began explaining why alleged footage, even if never released, can still become a powerful bargaining chip. In legal terms, possession, intent, and distribution matter far more than what the public actually sees. According to these experts, situations like this don't unfold loudly at first. They unfold quietly, through conversations, negotiations, and strategic decisions meant to prevent long-term damage. That's why the idea of a tape doesn't necessarily mean something dramatic appearing online overnight. Often, the real impact happens long before anything reaches the public eye. This is where the story becomes less about shock and more about control. Before we go any further, let me ask you something important. Do you believe celebrities always tell the full truth when their reputations are on the line? Or do you think we're only seeing carefully managed versions of reality? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want every verified update on this unfolding story, Make sure you subscribe to the Hidden Evidence now, because what's coming next is moving fast. Sources close to the situation have suggested that multiple parties were aware of alleged recordings well before the rumors reached social media. Some reportedly wanted legal protection, others wanted clarity, and some simply wanted distance. The fear wasn't just exposure, it was interpretation. Because once a narrative forms, even denials can become part of the story, rather than the end of it. What makes this moment especially volatile is Diddy's ongoing legal situation. With existing investigations already drawing attention to his private events, any suggestion of undisclosed footage adds fuel to an already burning fire. Even without confirmation, the implication alone reshapes public perception. And perception in Hollywood can be just as powerful as proof. As the conversation expanded, former insiders and industry voices began weighing in, carefully choosing words, emphasizing that nothing had been independently verified, and repeatedly using one critical term, alleged. That word matters, because while no evidence has been publicly confirmed, the volume of discussion suggests something real enough to make powerful people uncomfortable. And then there's 50 Cent again. His role in this story isn't about what he revealed, it's about what he validated. By acknowledging the conversation, he effectively confirmed that this wasn't just internet speculation. It was something being discussed among people who understand how Hollywood actually works. And once that door opened, it couldn't be closed again. Now the spotlight sits uncomfortably between three forces: Diddy's legal battles, Will Smith's public response, and an industry trying to protect itself from another reputational collapse. Every statement is being analyzed. Every silence is being questioned. And every new development raises the same question viewers keep asking: if nothing exists, why is everyone reacting so carefully? As this story continues to unfold, the line between rumor and reality grows thinner by the day. What started as quiet legal chatter has turned into a cultural moment that exposes how fragile even the strongest reputations can be when secrecy collides with scrutiny. And the deeper we look, the clearer it becomes that this isn't just about one person, one reaction, or one alleged tape. It's about how quickly the truth, or even the suggestion of it, can rewrite everything. Behind the public statements and carefully chosen words, the real pressure of this situation has been building in places most viewers never see. Long before social media began connecting dots and headlines started hinting at something larger, conversations were already happening quietly among legal teams, industry executives, and people whose job it is to anticipate risk before it explodes into scandal. In Hollywood, the most dangerous stories are rarely the ones shouted the loudest. At first, they're the ones whispered between people who understand how quickly silence can turn into exposure. According to multiple legal analysts familiar with high-profile entertainment disputes, the moment alleged footage is even discussed, the dynamic changes entirely. It's no longer about whether something is released, but about who knows it exists, who might obtain it, and how it could be interpreted if it ever surfaced. Even without public confirmation, the mere possibility creates leverage, anxiety, and urgency behind closed doors. And in this case, that urgency appears to have spread fast. What complicates matters further is the timing. Diddy's name was already under scrutiny due to ongoing legal challenges, and that scrutiny has a way of amplifying everything connected to it. Events that may have once been dismissed as private or irrelevant suddenly become re-examined through a very different lens. Legal experts have explained that when someone is already navigating investigations, even unrelated allegations can feel connected in the court of public opinion, whether that connection is fair or not. This is where industry silence becomes revealing. Several figures who are usually quick to defend themselves or clarify rumors chose instead to say nothing at all. No denials, no statements, no distancing. That kind of silence often signals one of two things. Either there's nothing worth responding to, or there's too much at stake to speak prematurely. And when silence appears across multiple corners of the same industry, it tends to suggest coordination rather than coincidence. Insiders have described an atmosphere of caution, not panic, but calculation. The goal, they say, isn't to control the public narrative outright, because that's nearly impossible when speculation gains traction. The goal is to avoid adding fuel to a fire that's already burning. Every word spoken becomes evidence, context, or contradiction later on. In situations like this, restraint isn't weakness, it's strategy. Meanwhile, the discussion around 50 Cent's role continued to grow. People close to the industry noted that his reaction carried weight precisely because he has little incentive to protect anyone else's reputation. When someone with a history of blunt honesty chooses to acknowledge a situation rather than dismiss it outright, listeners take notice. Not because he confirmed anything, but because he didn't laugh it off as nonsense either. That distinction matters. At the same time, attention kept returning to Will Smith, not because of new allegations, but because of how different his response felt compared to the usual Hollywood playbook. He didn't over-explain. He didn't escalate. He didn't disappear. Instead, he addressed the situation calmly, publicly, and without amplifying the rumor itself. For some observers, that approach reinforced his credibility. For others, it raised an uncomfortable question. Why step in at all unless the situation had the potential to grow? Former publicists and crisis managers have weighed in, explaining that reactions aren't always about guilt or innocence. Often, they're about containment. In an era where speculation spreads faster than facts, waiting too long can allow narratives to solidify beyond repair. Speaking early, even briefly, can sometimes draw a line before assumptions spiral too far out of control. But there's another layer that makes this story unusually complex. Legal professionals have pointed out that alleged recordings, especially those tied to private events, can involve multiple parties with conflicting interests. One person may want exposure, another may want suppression, a third may want distance. And once attorneys become involved, every option carries consequences. Attempting to make something go away can be misinterpreted. Ignoring it can be seen as indifference. And acknowledging it can open doors that are difficult to close. That's why this situation hasn't followed the familiar rise and fall pattern of internet rumors. Instead of peaking quickly and fading, it has lingered, resurfacing through interviews, commentary, and indirect references rather than explosive leaks. Each new mention adds weight without adding clarity, keeping audiences engaged but unresolved. Behind the scenes, some legal experts have explained that even viewing alleged material can create obligations, depending on the circumstances. Once someone with legal authority becomes aware of potentially unlawful content, they may be required to act or disclose. That alone makes people cautious about what they see, what they accept, and what they allow to be sent to them. In this environment, distance becomes protection, and yet distance doesn't stop curiosity. The entertainment world thrives on image, but it survives on reputation. Careers are built not just on talent, but on trust from audiences, brands, studios, and partners. When that trust feels threatened, even indirectly, the response is rarely emotional. It's procedural. Quiet meetings, private calls, careful statements, and a collective effort to prevent speculation from turning into certainty. As the days passed, one thing became increasingly clear. This wasn't a story being driven by proof, but by reaction. Who spoke? Who stayed silent? Who dismissed it? Who addressed it? Each move was analyzed not for what it revealed, but for what it implied. An implication in a media-driven culture can sometimes carry more power than facts. What makes this moment especially tense is that no definitive resolution has arrived. No confirmation, no denial strong enough to end the discussion entirely. Just fragments of perspective, layered over an industry already sensitive to allegations, accountability, and public reckoning. In that uncertainty, viewers are left trying to read between the lines, wondering which responses were proactive, which were protective, and which were simply waiting for the storm to pass. And while much of the focus remains on individual names, the larger story may be about something else entirely. About how fame magnifies risk. About how private moments, real or imagined, can reshape public legacies. And about how quickly the balance of power shifts when control over a narrative begins to slip. Because in Hollywood, the most revealing moments aren't always captured on camera. Sometimes they're revealed through who feels compelled to speak and who doesn't. As the speculation continued to circulate, a new pattern began to emerge, one that shifted the focus away from individual reactions and toward the deeper mechanics of how Hollywood protects itself when reputations are at stake. Veteran insiders have explained that when stories refuse to disappear, it's often because they intersect with unresolved issues already sitting beneath the surface. And in this case, those unresolved issues were impossible to ignore. Diddy's ongoing legal troubles had already placed a spotlight on his private world, creating an environment where even old stories suddenly felt relevant again. Events that once passed without scrutiny were now being revisited with new questions attached, not because new evidence had surfaced publicly, but because the context had changed. In moments like this, narratives don't need confirmation to gain momentum, they only need timing. Former security personnel, event staff, and industry associates began speaking more openly in interviews, not to accuse, but to describe atmospheres. The descriptions were careful, often framed as personal experiences rather than claims, but they painted a picture of environments where boundaries blurred and discretion was expected. These accounts didn't introduce new allegations. Instead, they reinforced the idea that certain spaces within the industry operated under different rules, rules understood by insiders but invisible to the public. This is where the conversation around alleged recordings gained renewed attention. Experts familiar with celebrity risk management have explained that footage doesn't have to be explicit to be damaging. Context alone can create narratives powerful enough to alter public perception. A few seconds, a setting, a recognizable figure when combined, they can fuel speculation far beyond what the material itself might justify. That's why in many high-profile cases, the fear isn't exposure of wrongdoing, but exposure without explanation. The longer this story lingered, the more it began to reflect a broader cultural shift. Audiences today are less willing to accept silence as reassurance. In the past, no comment often meant the issue would fade. Now it can feel like confirmation to those already suspicious. This shift places public figures in an impossible position: respond and risk amplifying the rumor, or stay silent and allow others to define the narrative. Will Smith's response continued to be dissected through this lens? Analysts noted that his tone remained consistent, calm, direct, and dismissive without being defensive. For many viewers, this reinforced the idea that he was pushing back against association rather than allegation. He wasn't responding to evidence, he was responding to proximity. And in Hollywood, proximity alone can be enough to cause lasting damage if left unchecked. Meanwhile, the industry itself appeared divided. Some voices urged caution, reminding audiences that no verified material had been released and that speculation should not be treated as fact. Others argued that repeated discussions across multiple platforms suggested something more substantial than rumor. This tension between skepticism and suspicion kept the story alive, with neither side able to fully silence the other. What's often overlooked in situations like this is the role of narrative fatigue. As stories stretch on without resolution, viewers become emotionally invested not in the truth, but in the outcome. They want closure, they want clarity, and when it doesn't arrive, they keep watching, hoping the next development will finally provide it. This dynamic fuels high retention, not because of shock, but because of unresolved tension. Behind the scenes, legal commentators have continued to emphasize a critical point. Absence of public evidence does not equal absence of private concern. Many disputes are resolved quietly, through agreements, negotiations, or preventative measures that never make headlines. The public rarely sees these processes, but they shape outcomes just the same. By the time a story disappears, its impact has often already been felt. Another factor complicating this situation is the interconnected nature of celebrity networks. Relationships in Hollywood overlap professionally, socially, and financially. When one figure becomes controversial, those connections are examined retroactively, often unfairly. Photos resurface. Past collaborations are reinterpreted. Neutral interactions are recast as meaningful associations. In that environment, distancing becomes a survival instinct rather than a moral judgment. This is why reactions like Will Smith's matter so much. Not because they confirm or deny anything specific, but because they signal how seriously the situation is being taken internally. When someone chooses to draw a public line, it suggests that the cost of being misunderstood outweighs the risk of speaking up. That calculation alone tells us how volatile the moment has become. As the narrative expanded, it also began to reflect larger questions about accountability and image. How much control do public figures really have once stories start circulating? And at what point does managing perception become as important as addressing facts? These questions don't have easy answers, but they resonate deeply in an era where attention rarely waits for verification. Despite the noise, one truth remained constant. Nothing definitive had been proven. No footage had been released. No formal accusations had been made connecting Will Smith to wrongdoing. And yet the story continued to evolve, not because of what was shown, but because of how people reacted to the possibility of it existing. This paradox sits at the heart of modern celebrity culture. Reality and perception move in parallel, sometimes intersecting, sometimes diverging completely. And when perception races ahead, even the strongest reputations can feel suddenly fragile. As viewers continued to follow every update, one question grew louder than all the rest, not what the tape shows, but whether its shadow alone is enough to change how we see the people connected to it. And as long as that question remains unanswered, the story isn't finished. Because the most powerful force in Hollywood has never been proof. It's uncertainty. As this story reaches its most critical stage, what stands out is not a dramatic reveal or a definitive conclusion, but the uncomfortable space in between the place where uncertainty lives and narratives are shaped long before facts arrive. By now, it's clear that this situation has evolved far beyond a single reaction or a single name. It has become a case study in how modern fame operates under relentless scrutiny, where perception can move faster than truth, and silence can speak just as loudly as words. What began as quiet legal chatter transformed into a cultural moment the instant it intersected with recognizable power. Diddy's legal challenges created the conditions. 50 Cent's acknowledgement signaled credibility, and Will Smith's response brought visibility. None of these elements alone would have sustained attention for this long, but together they formed a narrative that refuses to settle. Each piece reinforced the next, keeping the story in motion without ever delivering full resolution. Legal experts continue to stress that many high-profile disputes never reach the public in a complete form. They are negotiated, contained, and managed in ways designed to minimize damage rather than clarify truth. That reality often leaves audiences with fragments instead of answers. And in that vacuum, speculation thrives. Not because people want to believe the worst, but because human nature seeks coherence where none is offered. The entertainment industry has faced moments like this before, moments where reputations hung in balance, not because of confirmed wrongdoing, but because of association, implication, and timing. What's different now is the speed at which these moments unfold. There is little room for delay, little margin for missteps, and almost no opportunity to quietly reset once a narrative gains momentum. Every response becomes permanent, archived, replayed, and reinterpreted endlessly. Will Smith's handling of the situation has continued to divide opinion. Some see his response as measured and responsible, an effort to protect his legacy without inflaming rumor. Others view it as evidence of how fragile even the most carefully built image can be when it brushes against controversy. Both interpretations can exist at once, and that duality is exactly what keeps audiences engaged. The lack of a clear verdict forces viewers to keep watching, waiting for something definitive to emerge. Meanwhile, Diddy's situation remains unresolved, casting a long shadow over the entire discussion. As long as his legal battles continue, every related story gains added weight. The industry understands this, which is why so many responses have been cautious, calculated, and incomplete. In Hollywood, distance is often the first line of defense, and clarity is rarely offered until it becomes unavoidable. What this moment ultimately reveals is how deeply interconnected image, power, and silence have become. Fame no longer protects, it amplifies. Privacy no longer conceals, it invites curiosity. And control over a narrative is no longer held by those inside the story, but by the collective reaction of those watching from the outside. In that environment, even unverified possibilities can reshape legacies. As viewers, we're left with more questions than answers, not just about this specific situation, but about the systems that allow stories like this to linger without resolution. How many narratives are quietly managed before they ever reach public awareness? How often does reaction outweigh reality? And how many reputations are shaped not by what is proven, but by what is implied. One thing is certain, this isn't the kind of story that ends cleanly. It fades only when attention shifts elsewhere or when clarity finally forces its way into the conversation. Until then, every development, every statement, and every silence will continue to be examined for meaning. If you've stayed with this story from beginning to end, ask yourself this: do you think public reactions alone can permanently change how we see powerful figures, even without definitive proof? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you want to stay ahead of every verified update, every shift in the narrative, and every moment that matters, make sure you're subscribed to the Hidden Evidence. Because stories like this don't disappear, they evolve.